January 1951. Miles Davis walks into Apex Studios in New York with a contract in his pocket and heroin in his system. He's 24 years old. In 6 months, he'll be too sick to play. In 3 years, he'll lock himself in a room and go through withdrawal cold turkey. In 4 years, he'll perform at Newport and save his career. But right now, nobody knows any of that. Right now, Capitol Records has dropped him. The birth of the Cool Sessions, recordings that will later be called revolutionary, flopped commercially. Duke Ellington offered him a spot in his orchestra. Davis turned it down. The Nonet disbanded. Bob Weinstock, a 22-year-old kid who started selling jazz records from his parents' house, has just given Davis a $750 advance and a 1-year deal with Prestige Records. It's not Columbia, it's not Blue Note, it's survival money. The musicians file in. John Lewis on piano, Percy Heath on bass, Sonny Rollins on tenor saxophone, Roy Haynes on drums, Benny Green on trombone. They're here to record Blue Room, a Rodgers and Hart standard from 1926. Nobody knows it yet, but this session marks the beginning of a 5-year relationship that will produce some of the most important jazz recordings of the decade. These will be the years Davis spends in the wilderness, recording sporadically, fighting addiction, wandering between genius and self-destruction. But here's what makes this moment different from every other cautionary tale about jazz and heroin. Miles Davis will survive. And these recordings everyone ignores will later be recognized as the birth of an entirely new sound. The question is, how do you create the future when you're barely surviving the present? By 1951, jazz was fragmenting. The bebop revolution that Davis helped create alongside Charlie Parker was becoming rigid, formulaic. The birth of the Cool Sessions offered an alternative, a cerebral, arranged approach with unusual instrumentation. French horn, tuba, complex voicings that felt more like chamber music than bebop. But cool jazz wasn't selling. The recordings attracted critics and musicians, not crowds. Davis needed work. He needed money. Prestige Records needed content. Weinstock was building his catalog one session at a time, recording musicians with minimal rehearsal, often in single takes. The philosophy was simple: capture the spontaneity of a jam session, get it on tape, move on. For Davis, signing with Prestige wasn't about artistic vision, it was about economic reality. After the cool jazz experiment, after turning down Ellington, after the Nonet fell apart, this was what remained. Small sessions for an independent label, paid by the track, no guarantees. But there was something else happening beneath the surface. Davis had developed a heroin habit. In the jazz world of 1951, particularly in New York, this wasn't unusual. Charlie Parker used, Billie Holiday used. The drug had become intertwined with the music itself, a badge of belonging to the bebop elite. What made Davis different was this: he was going to keep recording through the entire descent. Every session, every track, every note, documented, preserved. The sessions Davis would record for Prestige over the next 5 years don't just capture performances. They capture a man creating his future sound while destroying his present life. The first session happens on January 17, 1951. Davis records Blue Room with a quintet. The track runs less than 3 minutes. Clean, economical. His tone is clear, restrained, almost delicate. This isn't the fiery bebop of Parker's quintet. This is something cooler, more intimate. Weinstock compiles it with other tracks for various releases. There's no grand plan yet, just sessions. Material, singles for the jukebox market. By October, Davis is back at Apex Studios. This time he brings Jackie McLean on alto saxophone and Art Blakey on drums. The session produces 2 Davis originals, Bluing and Out of the Blue. Bluing runs nearly 10 minutes. It's a loose blowing session, the kind of extended improvisation that Prestige favored. The musicians stretch out. Davis solos with that distinctive middle register approach, the one that sounds like he's thinking out loud, finding melody in the negative space. Something feels different about these recordings. There's a looseness here that wasn't present in the birth of the Cool Sessions. Davis is moving away from tight arrangements, from the prepared language of his nonet. He's returning to the blowing tradition, but on his own terms. Yet the recordings are haphazard. Sessions happen when they happen. Davis is already beginning the slow drift that will define the next few years. His performances become less reliable. The heroin isn't controlling him yet, but it's there, a shadow in the studio, a presence in his life. In 1953, Weinstock decides to package 3 tracks recorded across 2 1951 sessions. Blue Room from January, Bluing and Out of the Blue from October. The album title, Blue Period. It's a thematic compilation, Weinstock's attempt to create coherence from scattered sessions. 3 tracks, all with blue in the title. Pressed as a 10-inch LP, it becomes Davis's second release for Prestige. This wasn't how albums were supposed to work, but Prestige operated differently. Weinstock recorded constantly, banking material, then organized it later into thematic packages. The blue songs became one album. Other tracks from the same sessions went elsewhere, repackaged, recombined, released over years. For Davis, this meant his work was being curated by someone else, shaped by commercial logic rather than artistic intent. But here's the tension. Davis was beginning to develop a new sound, one that would later be called hard bop. The extended blowing sessions, the blues-based approach, the return to feeling over intellectualism. What no one realized, not Weinstock, not the critics, not even Davis himself, was that this accidental album was quietly documenting a transformation that would reshape jazz. Blue Period captures him mid-transition, moving away from cool jazz, not yet committed to hard bop, struggling with addiction, recording when he could, disappearing when he couldn't. The album documents fragments of a revolution nobody recognized yet. By 1953, the same year Blue Period is released, Davis's heroin use has deepened. He's 27 years old. His performances have become increasingly unreliable. The downbeat interview with Cab Calloway makes his addiction public knowledge. In the tight jazz community, this is devastating. Club owners become wary. Opportunities dry up. Davis supports his habit through music when he can, through hustling when he can't. He lives at the Hotel America on 48th Street with his family. Betty Carter, the jazz singer, lets them share her room to split the rent. His father is still sending money, $75 a week, but it's not enough. Nothing is ever enough. In autumn 1953, Davis returns to his father's house in East St. Louis. He's trying to get clean. He stays for several months, away from New York, away from the easy access to drugs. The music industry moves on without him. Other trumpeters get the calls. The sessions dry up. Blue Period sits in record stores, largely ignored. It's a 10-inch LP on an independent label. 3 tracks, nothing revolutionary, nothing that demands attention. But for those who listen closely, there are hints of what Davis is becoming. The restraint in his playing, the space he leaves between notes, the way he makes the trumpet sound vulnerable, conversational, almost fragile. This is the sound of a man at war with himself, and the war is about to get worse before it gets better. Blue Period enters the world in 1953 with almost no fanfare. Prestige's distribution is limited. The jazz market is small. Davis's name carries weight among musicians and critics, but he's not a commercial draw. Not yet. The album doesn't chart. There are no reviews in major publications. It's simply another Prestige release in a catalog full of sessions, one more document in the ongoing story of modern jazz. For most listeners, if they encounter Blue Period at all, it's as background to the bigger story. Miles Davis, the troubled genius. Miles Davis, the heroin addict. Miles Davis, who had so much promise and seems to be throwing it away. The tracks themselves, Blue Room, Bluing, Out of the Blue, don't sound like failure. They sound measured, intelligent, mature. Davis plays with confidence and clarity. But the context overwhelms the content. This is music made during the descent, before the comeback. It exists in the shadow of what came before and what might never come after. Jazz critics who do pay attention note the shift in Davis's approach. The move away from the arranged, cool jazz sound. the return to blowing, to extended improvisation. Some hear it as regression. Others hear it as Davis finding his way back to the emotional core of the music. Nobody hears it as the beginning of hard bop. Not yet. And nobody knows that in less than a year, Davis will make a decision that changes everything, not just for him, but for the entire trajectory of modern jazz. The question is whether he'll live long enough to make it. The consequences of Davis's addiction play out over the next year. By early 1954, his habit has progressed to the point where it's affecting his ability to perform. The physical symptoms, the flu-like malaise, the weakness, the mood swings, are impossible to hide. He's 27 years old and looks older, sounds older. Davis makes the decision to get clean. Not gradually, not with a program. Cold turkey. He locks himself in a room at his father's house in East St. Louis and goes through withdrawal. The room has one bed, one window. By all accounts, it's excruciating. Days of fever, nausea, muscle pain, insomnia. The kind of suffering most people wouldn't choose if they had any other option. But Davis is stubborn, willful. He comes from money, from a middle-class background. He knows he's destroying himself, and he refuses to let it continue. By February 1954, he's back in New York, clean, hungry, ready to prove what those scattered Prestige sessions were trying to say. The musicians he recorded with during the Prestige years, Jimmy Heath, J.J. Johnson, Horace Silver, Art Blakey, Sonny Rollins, have helped him create a sound that will become known as hard bop. Blues-based, funky, emotionally direct. The sessions resume. Van Gelder's studio in Hackensack becomes the primary recording location. The music is still being recorded quickly with minimal rehearsal, but there's a new energy. In March 1954, Davis records Walkin', a tune that will become emblematic of the hard bop movement. It's everything Blue Period hinted at but fully realized. The extended blowing, the groove, the conversational interplay between musicians. Blue Period, released a year before, suddenly makes more sense in retrospect. Those 1951 sessions weren't Davis losing his way. They were Davis finding it. July 17, 1955. Newport Jazz Festival. Evening set. Davis performs Round Midnight with a pickup group. His playing is revelatory, controlled, emotional, technically flawless. The muted trumpet sounds like it's whispering secrets. Every note lands exactly where it needs to. The performance lasts less than 6 minutes. It changes everything. George Avakian of Columbia Records is in the audience. Within weeks, Davis has a contract with a major label, the kind of deal he couldn't get 3 years ago when he was recording Blue Period for Prestige. Suddenly, the narrative shifts. Davis isn't the tragic junkie anymore. He's the phoenix rising from the ashes. The comeback story jazz needed. The Prestige recordings, including Blue Period, begin to be reassessed. Critics go back and listen with new ears. What they hear is a musician working through a transition, documenting his evolution in real time. The Blue Period tracks aren't minor works anymore. They're part of the story of how Miles Davis transformed himself from a cool jazz innovator into a hard bop pioneer. Prestige continues releasing the material Davis recorded during his contract years. The marathon sessions of 1956, done to fulfill his obligations before moving to Columbia, produce Cookin', Relaxin', Workin', and Steamin'. These albums become classics, proof of what Davis was capable of even while transitioning between labels. Blue Period gets swept up in this reassessment. Record collectors seek it out. The 10-inch format becomes a curiosity, then a collectible. By 1955, when Prestige reconfigures its recordings for 12-inch LPs, the Blue Period tracks are split up. Bluing and Out of the Blue end up on an album called Dig. Blue Room appears on Miles Davis and horns. The original album dissolves into the larger catalog, but its DNA persists in the music Davis continues to make. And that DNA, that loose, blues-based, emotionally direct approach, is about to become the dominant language of jazz for the next decade. The Prestige years, 1951 to 1956, represent a crucial period in Davis's development. He enters as a cool jazz experimenter coming off the birth of the Cool Sessions. He leaves as a hard bop pioneer, signed to Columbia, leading what will become one of the greatest quintets in jazz history. Blue Period sits near the beginning of this transformation. It's easy to overlook. 3 tracks, a thematic compilation, recorded during Davis's darkest period. But the album captures something essential. The sound of an artist in transition, working without a safety net, finding his way forward through improvisation and instinct. The extended blowing sessions that define hard bop, the format becomes standard. Davis, Coltrane, Rollins, all the major figures of the 50s and 60s use it. The marathon recording sessions, the minimal rehearsal, the emphasis on spontaneity. This approach has its roots in the Prestige sessions. In Weinstock's philosophy of capturing jazz as it happens, not as it's prepared. Blue Period doesn't sound like Kind of Blue or Bitches Brew or any of Davis's later masterpieces, but it sounds like the beginning of the journey that makes those albums possible. It's the sound of Miles Davis learning to trust himself again, note by note. Blue Period teaches us that transformation doesn't happen in clean narratives. Davis didn't emerge from his addiction and immediately create masterpieces. He worked, he recorded, he played sessions, he showed up even when his life was falling apart. The album represents something we don't always want to acknowledge about artistic greatness. Sometimes the most important work happens in the margins, in the scattered sessions, in the moments when nobody is paying attention. Weinstock's decision to package these tracks together under a thematic title seems arbitrary. 3 songs with blue in the name, but the theme resonates beyond the titles. These are blues in the deepest sense. Music made during struggle. Music that documents pain and persistence. When we listen to Blue Period now, we hear it through the filter of everything that came after. Davis's triumph over addiction. His Newport performance. The first great quintet. Kind of Blue. The Electric Period. The entire arc of a legendary career. But in 1951, none of that existed yet. There was only a young trumpeter, 24 years old, trying to find his way forward, one session at a time. The album survives as proof that even in the darkest periods, when the path forward isn't clear, when survival itself feels uncertain, the work continues. Davis kept playing, kept recording, kept searching for the sound he could hear in his head, but couldn't yet fully articulate. Blue Period is what that search sounds like. And 70+ years later, that sound still matters. Not because it's Davis's best work, but because it's the most honest work. Work that documents the process of becoming, not the finished product. In jazz, as in life, sometimes the most important albums aren't the ones that change everything in a single moment. They're the ones that keep you alive, keep you working, keep you moving forward, long enough to discover what you're actually trying to say. Blue Period didn't save Miles Davis's career, but it kept him recording until he was ready to save it himself.